Hello everyone. In today's video, I would like to show you how you can use Oauth in your Express applications without relying on third-party libraries. Now, the main reason why you would do this is just to understand what is going on with these third-party libraries, because they indeed make this process a lot easier. For example, if you're using Express.js, you would use a library such as Passport.js. If you're making something like a Next.js application, you would rely on the Next auth that they provide. But I just find it useful to know how they work under the hood before you start using them. Then you can start using them and you'll find it a lot easier. Now, if you're watching this video, you probably already know what Oauth is. If you don't, here's a very quick summary. You want to use Oauth in your applications basically to allow users to sign up to your service or your application without having to provide you with their passwords. You can definitely still implement a feature in your application where you allow users to give your passwords. But nowadays, if you go to a lot of online websites, they're already implementing something like sign in with Google or sign in with Github. So in this video, I'll first take you through the basics, and then I'll show you how you can scale this Oauth implementation with other things such as JWT tokens and database storage. Okay, so here I have the most basic Express application. I'm going to be using TypeScript for this implementation. You feel free not to. You feel free to use any development environment you want. Also, I'm using .env to load my environment variables. Then I have a simple router. That's the one that we're going to be using for Oauth. And finally, this application is going to be listening on port 3001. Okay, so let's say we want to register users into our application. For that, we need some kind of record, right? To link them with some kind of database that we might have. So the way Oauth providers provide you your client information is through an access token. Now, your client needs to authorize you to get that access token in order for you to start getting their personal information. It may vary depending on the Oauth provider in terms of how much information they give you. For example, in GitHub, you might not only get access to the user's email, you might also get access to their private repos, etc. We're going to learn how to configure that in a second. But the key point here is that you need that access token to then be authorized to request the user's private information. And to gain that access token, you need what's called a code. So yes, you need a code to then get the user's access token and then get the user's private information. I know it's a little bit of a roundabout, but you'll see why it makes a lot of sense in just a second, especially for security. So step number one will be getting that code from GitHub. And the way we'll do it is by creating a route handler in our application that the user can use to then be redirected to GitHub. And once they're there, they're going to sign up either by a password or whatever method they have configured. And that will redirect the users back to our application with that code that we can use to get the access token. So in this case, since GitHub will be our Oauth provider, we need to create what's called a GitHub application. And this is going to be in their website and will be totally for free. You can also do something like a Google Oauth process. And for that, you would need to go to Google Cloud and create your application there. But since we're going to be using GitHub, I'm just assuming that you already have a GitHub account. So I'm here in GitHub settings. So you click on your profile here, settings. Then you move down to where it says developer settings and go where it says Oauth apps, new Oauth app. Once we are here, you can set whatever you want for the application name. For the homepage URL, you can really also set whatever you want. It's just for information. Just make sure that it makes sense for your server. Now, this is the critical part, the callback URL. this is where we will receive the code that we will later use to get the access token. So make sure that whatever you're going to use here, make sure you don't have any typo. All right, so register the application, and GitHub will give you two things that it will use as environment variables in our application. One is the client ID, and one is the client secret that you can generate. So just copy these. So here I am at my env file, and I just copied the two credentials provided by GitHub. Now, technically, the client ID can be public, and you only have to be concerned about hiding your secret. But you definitely want to keep the two of them as secret. Now, I'm just showing the client secret here because I'm going to delete the application after I'm done with this video, but you hide the two of them. Back to our Express application, we're going to allow a GET request to, in this case, /GitHub, can be whatever you want. And this is going to serve the purpose of when the users click on that typical sign in with GitHub button. Now, in this application, we're not going to have a front end, but you get the idea. So we want to redirect users to our Oauth providers so that they can sign in there and then come back to our application. In this case, I'm going to copy some code and I'm going to go over it. Now, the specifics of where you need to redirect users to, so to which URLs, will obviously depend on what provider you're using. And remember, the main point of this route handler is to redirect the users to our OAuth provider. That is why we're using this redirect method in the response object. So we need to redirect them to a URL that'll look something like this. Well, will look like this. And I'll leave this URL in the description, and we need to build it with our client ID and the same redirect URI that we specified when creating our application back in GitHub. Now you need to be careful when writing this redirect URI because if you see that there are errors, it is very likely that you have some typos in this redirect URI. So just make sure you have the same thing that you specified when creating your application in GitHub. And finally, we have this scope query parameter, and here we specify what information we want from our client. In this case, we say that we want the user and email. Now, the user contains things such as the user name, the full name, and, well, amongst other things. And the email is an array of multiple emails, as you'll see in a second. Again, check your spelling. It is likely that if there's an error, it might be because of a typo somewhere. Now I'm going to allow a second GET request, and if you notice, it is going to be the same callback URL that I am specifying in the first route handler, meaning that once the clients are done signing in, they're going to be redirected from GitHub to this route. I'm just making a log to the terminal for testing. Okay, so let's test this. I'll go back to my browser and I'll go to localhost 3000 Oauth GitHub. Press enter. And well, right away, you'll see that, well, this is definitely the URL that we specified here with our client ID. And well, it's asking us to give permission to our application and give away our personal user data and our email. So let's click on authorize and let's check the console, and we can see that there is this request received. If you got that, perfect. If not, again, likely the spelling. Now back to our browser, we'll see something very interesting. We'll see that GitHub is trying to redirect users back to our server to the callback URL that we specified, and it's doing so by attaching a code as a query parameter. Now it's likely that if you don't see this, you need to send a some kind of response, and you'll likely see it like this. But just to show you, I'll go back to the same route, and the process will trigger again, and I'm gonna get the code that I am supposed to get. Now this code is very important, and it's ephemeral, meaning it only lasts a few seconds and then it is invalidated. So what we need to do with this code is send an HTTP request to GitHub to get the access token, and then we can use that access token to, again, I know it's repetitive, but to get the user's information. We could also store that access token. I'm going to show you that at the end of this video. Let's focus now on getting that token. As I said, we need to make an HTTP request to GitHub, and it's going to be right in this route handler where we'll have access to the code. So I'm just going to copy and paste this. So it's basically an async function, and in here we're going to use Axios, which we need to import. Of course, you can also use something like fetch instead if you want. And yes, we need to install Axios. All right, so that's out of the way. So I'm gonna leave this URL in the description as well. And we're gonna make use of the client secret for the first time. And we're going to build this body in a post request. So we're going to specify our client ID, client secret, and very important, the code that we just got from the request that GitHub redirected to our server. And finally, in this third parameter of Axios, we can specify some headers, and you want to specify that you want to accept application JSON. If you don't, you're gonna get the access token formatted differently. So make sure you add this header. And like that, you're going to access the data that GitHub will send you back, which is the body that they'll send you, and they'll attach this access token. And finally, let's log that token. All right. Okay, so we start our development server again, go back to our browsers, and go back to the same route we have been going to. And as you can see, we get this access token, and it should start with GHO. If you got that, you are golden. All that is left to do now is to use this token to get the user's private data that they allowed us to get. I'm going to copy a few more lines of code. We're going to be making two different HTTP requests. One is going to be for the user data, and another one is going to be for email data of the same user, of course. And finally, we need to append authorization headers in both requests, and this is going to be in the form of a bearer token. If you're not familiar with, just be careful. You need to place a space right after you type bearer, and then you can concatenate the token. All right, so I'm gonna do the full process again. I'm gonna hit this route handler, and I'm gonna log this to the terminal. Okay, so the server is started. I'm gonna go to the same route handler, and voila, we're gonna have access to two different main things. As we mentioned earlier, the user data is gonna contain things such as my username, GitHub ID, full name, and even my email. But the email data is going to be an array in case the user has many emails associated with it. In this case, here tells me that this is my primary email, but you might get more than one email. Hopefully you get the idea. But here, you can use this line of code to get the verified email of the user you are inspecting in this case. So I'm gonna trigger this, and in this case I'm getting this 401 bad credentials error because I sent the request with the same token that for now it has expired. As we mentioned, it is ephemeral. So I'm gonna send a brand new request to this route. I'm gonna start my server. By the way, I'm going to log this primary email. So let's see what happens. Okay, it's there. All right, here is my email. It is better formatted. Okay, so that would be the overall process of using OAuth. As you saw, we never got to see the user's password, which is great. And before ending this video, I just would like to show you a few more things that you can do beyond, and a few more good practices that you could implement if you would like to maybe scale this. I'm going to leave the repository to this program in the description. And even though it might seem a little bit more complicated, it's really relying on the same concept that we just learned. By the way, I have access to these comments with colors through an extension called Better Comments. So we're gonna have the same thing as we did in our previous application. The thing here is that I'm doing it with Google and with GitHub. Again, there are a lot of OAuth providers, and you can easily just look up how to implement it with Google or any other OAuth provider. It's very similar to how you do it with GitHub, so I'm not going to touch it on this video. So again, we have the same route as we did before. I just called it Oauth GitHub in this case, and let's see what it does. It is the same redirection with our client ID, the redirect URI to the same URL. Okay, same thing. Then we have another callback route, and this function is a wrapper around a function that can be reused with different OAuth providers. So the thing with different OAuth providers is that even though they follow the same protocol, you do need different ways to request data from them. So obviously, the most evident thing is that you need different URL functions, but also you might need different headers and a different ways to structure your requests. And that's both to get the code and to get the access token. So this is how we do it with GitHub. But if we go to the Google route handler, okay, this one, you'll see that it's the same shared controller, but with a different way to get the code and the token. Hopefully you can take a look at these personally. But the main idea is that you have different OAuth providers, different ways to get their data, but since it's the same protocol, the continuation of this can be replicated with different OAuth providers, just for deduplication. So as you remember, as we did earlier, we are also getting the code from the request, from the query parameter of the request. And we are going to use that code to call a getToken function that we can pass depending on the OAuth provider that we're using. So for GitHub, it looks exactly as we did before. We did an HTTP request to GitHub to this URL. We pass our secret, our ID, the code, and we accept application JSON. So we return this token, and with this token, we call yet another function to get the user data. Okay, the user email and the user data. And remember how GitHub gave us a lot of information from the user. So here I just returned from this function what I believe is information that I'm interested on, right? Username, email, whether or not it's a verified email, image URL, full name, and the actual ID of, well, in this case, if it's going to be through GitHub, the user's GitHub ID. If it's going to be through Google, the user's Google ID, right? That's what this object property is all about. So once I have this information, I am going to store it in my Prisma, well, in my Postgres database, I'm sorry, but not before encrypting the access token. Because as I mentioned, you can store this access token for future use. So it might be the case that the user's OAuth information changes, right? Let's say their username changes. So instead of you having to go through the same process again of having to redirect the user to then receive a code from GitHub and another access token, you can just encrypt it. But as a good practice, well, not as a good practice, but you should encrypt the token because it's critical. It's for the user's information. So you don't want to have that in your database as in a raw form. So let's take a look at this encrypt function. It's using the Node.js native crypto module. You don't have to really get a lot into this. It's basically taking the Oauth token and returning the encrypted version. In the future, we'll obviously use this decrypt function to decrypt the token, right? As a summary. So we store this token to our Postgres database or whatever database you're using. So yeah, and finally, very important, we want to give users a JWT token. In this case, I'm giving users this token through a cookie. Now, why do we want this token? Well, it serves the purpose of any other form of session that you use in your application. If you have more features, you don't want users to have to go through GitHub in this case, right? Or to sign in again for every action that they want to perform. In this case, we're just going to provide them with a JWT token with a user ID that's going to be linked to their profile in our database. And that profile is going to be linked to their GitHub user. So let's take a look at how a user looks in our database. Of course, you can structure your database as you want and store whatever you want from the user, as long as they provide it to you. So here, very important, the user ID native to this database. So remember, in this JWT, when I sign a token, what I store as the payload is the user ID, so that when they come again and want to use a feature of my application, I'm going to have their ID and I'm going to be able to link them with their GitHub profile, and I'm going to know it's definitely them. If they later go to another device of theirs where they have their GitHub account as well, they can come back and I'm going to be able to know that it's them. So for example, I have this route handler function that requires authorization. So instead of me having to redirect the user over and over to GitHub, I'm just going to look at their JWT token. I'm going to get the user ID from it, from verifying it. Once I have that, I'm just going to look at the database with that user ID. By the way, in this case, I'm using Prisma. Again, as I've repeated over and over in this video, you feel to use whatever environment you would like. So from the database, I look at whether it's a GitHub Oauth provider that originated that user or a Google one. And based on that, I'm going to trigger one of these two functions. If it is a user that originated from GitHub, I'm going to run this function, right? That's exactly the same one that we have been looking at. By the way, we're getting this access token by decrypting it. So remember that we first encrypted it when they signed up. Well, here we do basically the opposite. And with that, we can successfully get the data again without having to request a new access token every single time, right? And here I just say that the data was fetched successfully. And that would be it for this implementation. It all relies on the same concept of OAuth that we learned in the beginning of this video. I'm just expanding it a lot more. So that would be it. I hope you learned a lot from this video. If you have any suggestions or any questions, feel free to leave it in the comments. See you in the next one.